Our track coach was over by the high jumper. He was getting in his face, and he was telling him something, but we really couldn't hear what he was saying to him. But you could tell that the high jumper wasn't all that confident. And all of a sudden, the coach turns around and leaves the high jumper, and he goes over to the bar, and he moves it up to 7 feet. He walks over to his high jumper, he puts his hand and he pounds it into his chest, and he says, "You can do this. You can do it." And then he walks away. Well, the high jumper does his little pre-warm-up dance, if you will, and he heads towards the bar, and almost in perfect form goes over the bar. And as he lands on the mat, he jumps up and he just lets out this huge war cry of just praise that he made it. And then they looked over at the coach, and the coach had his back to the high jumper the whole time. But the coach kind of had this smirk on his face, almost to say, "I told you you could. I knew you could." Have you ever had someone in your life that called out the greatness out of you? That saw something in you that no one else saw, and quite frankly, you probably didn't even see it in yourself. But they saw something in you, and they challenged you. And they weren't satisfied until they saw you achieve what you were capable of. When we go to 2 Timothy, what we find is this manifesto of mentoring. Paul is towards the end of his life, and he's in prison. This is literally one of the last letters, and they're pretty sure that it is the last letter that he ever wrote when he was in prison. Paul, toward the end of his life, and this global kingdom leader is coming to the end of this pastoral run. And he can't get Timothy out of his mind. Timothy is almost 830 miles away, but it's almost like Timothy's right there, and Timothy is just having his life just spoken into by Paul. The prison is overcrowded and it's dark, but he can't get Timothy off of his mind. So he asks for some paper and a pen, and he begins to write. What he writes is this dream, this picture, this tell-all narrative to remind Timothy that he was made for more. That God had called him to something specific in his life. As we look at this letter to Timothy throughout this month, I hope that you will see that this is also an invitation to us as well. That God has something more for us. That God desires something more from us. Can I ask you a question? Do you have a Paul in your life? Do you have someone in your life that speaks into your life? That challenges you? That when they see that you're getting comfortable, they challenge you to step out of that comfort zone. They almost seem to pull out of you something that you don't see. Do you have someone like that in your life? How many of you, the show of hands, would say that you have a mentor in your life right now? Okay. How many of you, with a show of hands, would say that you wish you had a mentor in your life? How many of you have a Timothy in your life? Someone that you can speak into. Someone that you see greatness in them, but they haven't yet seen it in themselves. But you're able to speak into their life and challenge them to push them towards the greatness that you see that God has for them. Here's one thing that I've learned over the years. Every sincere Christ follower will go to a deeper, more beautiful level when they have a Paul pouring into their life and when they are also pouring into a Timothy. I know in my life and in my ministry, I've never been more satisfied in my faith than when I've had people speaking into me. But I've also been able to have people in my life that have graciously allowed me to speak into their life. It helps us grow in our faith, but we also return that and speak into other people and speak faith into them. During the days of Jesus, in Rome and Greek cultures were fascinated with the arts. They began to make these theaters, and you began to see these theaters pop up all over the Greek culture in the ancient Near East. And the word theater actually means to look at. And so these crowds would gather and they would just watch the people on stage. In Ephesus, where Timothy was, they actually had a theater that would hold 25,000 people. And every day and every night, these theaters would be full of people sitting and watching what was going on the stage. And they came, and there would be these actors, and they would come on stage, and they would be carrying a bag. And these actors were called upokristes. Upokristes. This is actually where we get our word hypocrite. The word hypocrite actually means to sift under the mask. To sift under the mask. And they would reach into their bag and they would pull out a mask. And that mask would set the tone. They would begin to say, okay, what kind of voice inflection do I need to have? What kind of voice tone do I need to speak with? How do I need to act with my body? And it would all depend upon the mask that they had. But Jesus began to see something else going on in that culture. He saw that many of the religious leaders of that time, many of the followers of God, were acting. They became fixated on what people, with people looking at them. They wanted people's attention. They wanted people to know how holy they were. Their life wasn't about pointing people to the goodness of the Father. It was about, look at me. Look at the things that I've done. Jesus even talks about this in Matthew chapter 6, verse 5. He says, and when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. I tell you, they have received their reward in full. And then in verse 16, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. 17 times in the Gospels, Jesus tells people to stop acting. Stop doing these things that were meant to be about me and you. Stop doing them so that simply other people can see you do them. Jesus counseled the people not to wear masks and not to draw the attention away from God. Worship was always meant to be about God. It was never meant to be about us. In the ancient Near East, they actually feared the person behind the mask. The people watching would actually warn these upokristes not to stay under the mask too long, because they feared that if they stayed in character too long, they would begin to become like their character. And this is what we begin to see. We act like something we're not for so long that what we are not becomes what we are. What we never intended to be literally becomes, literally we become it. So Paul has a word for his student. He deeply cares about Timothy. And so in 2 Timothy chapter 1, he starts out by saying in verse 2, "To Timothy, my dear son." And I want to stop right there because this is really important. You see, we can already see Paul's affection that he has for Timothy. But Timothy isn't actually Paul's son. We don't know a lot about Timothy's father, but we're pretty sure that he was out of the picture pretty early in Timothy's life. You see, his father was a Greek Gentile and his mother was Jewish. However, Timothy wasn't circumcised, so he couldn't enter the synagogue. And he was not accepted by the Gentiles either because he was also Jewish. Timothy didn't belong anywhere. He wasn't accepted among the Jewish people. He wasn't accepted among the Gentiles. His father had abandoned him early in life. And Paul begins his letter to Timothy, my dear son. He loves Timothy as a son. He's taken Timothy under his wing, and he wants to speak into his life as a father would speak into his son's life. If you've ever been in this place where Timothy is, having had a parent who or loved one who wasn't present in your life, or maybe they abandoned you, you can probably resonate and understand and read into the insecurities and the pressures and those identity crises that Timothy has probably walked through. But the first thing that Paul wants Timothy to know is that he's loved. That he is loved. I believe that you cannot speak into a person's life and it have any impact until that person knows that they are loved. That you have their best interest at heart. So he goes on, says to Timothy, my dear son, grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus our Lord. Before this point, Timothy or Paul, in all of his letters, he writes grace and peace. But for some reason, to Timothy, he says grace, mercy, and peace. I like what Chuck Swindoll says. He says, grace is God's gift to the worthless. Mercy is God's ministry to the helpless, and peace is God's love for the restless. Paul sees something in Timothy that Timothy does not see. And first, he wants him to know that he's loved. Second, he wants him to know that he is surrounded, and that the words that are about to be spoken into his life flow out of grace, mercy, and peace. So Paul goes on. He says, I thank God whom I serve, as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience. As night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you, so that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. I remembered your tears. I imagine those of you who are parents in this room, that if you closed your eyes and you thought of your children, you could remember their tears. You could remember, you'd be flashed back to a point where your child, whether they were hurt, whether someone else hurt them, but you remember their tears. And there's just something inside of you that almost makes you feel like you just love them even more. Why? Because in that moment, they need that love even more. And God gives us this ability to go beyond what we think our capacity to love is. I can remember thinking that I could never love my child more than this moment. And then a few weeks later, it's like, I could never love this child more than in this. And it just like, there's this continuous love capacity that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Because God gives us this love and this desire to speak into people's lives. Let me ask you this. Before I do that. Nope, never mind. Let me ask you this. Is sincere what you would use to describe your faith? Is sincere what you would use to describe your faith? Or is there another word that you would use to describe your faith? In Greek, the word sincere comes from combining two other Greek words. The first one is ana, which means not. And the second one is upokristo, which means hypocrite. So to be sincere means not a hypocrite. To have a sincere faith, that your faith is not hiding behind anything. When God looks at you and he sees your faith, does he see it for what it is? Or is it hidden behind something? Is our true faith what is revealed when God looks at us? Paul is asking Timothy, and he's focusing on that sincere faith. And he's challenging him to live that authentic faith. And he even goes back and he gives examples of his grandmother Lois and Eunice. And he even says that I see it in you. He sees it in him. but there's some things covering it up. There's some things in the way of this faith. I wonder how many of you would really use the word sincere as the word that we would use to describe our faith. Because the reality is that when we go into that business meeting, when we go out to dinner with friends, or we invite people over for a cookout at our house, or we come to church, we carry a bag with us. We're prepared because we carry our bag with us everywhere we go, because it has our masks in it. In whatever situation we find ourselves in, we have to be prepared to put on our mask. And depending on the situation, depends on the mask that we pull out. So let's look at a few of those masks. Let's look at 4 of them. The first one is the performer mask. You know, these are the people that live for success. These are the people that their achievements drive everything that they do. They want to be performed. These people want to be known for the things that they have done in their life. Look at me. Look at the things that I've done. Look at the things that I've accomplished. It's almost like you're building this brand. And whenever someone says your name, the person hearing your name immediately thinks of the things that you've done. How many times have you been introduced to someone and they said, "Oh, you're the..." And it's your title at work. I don't know how many times people say, "You're the pastor of that cowboy church." Yep, that's me. Almost as if that title defines me. You see, over time, we create this persona. And the word persona in Latin actually means being a mask. That we've created this mask that we show the rest of the people around us. For those of you who find your identity in your achievements and successes, what happens when you fail? What happens when you fail? What does it make you feel when your performance doesn't go all that well? We begin to beat ourselves up. We begin to think that we're not good enough, that we failed, we'll never be successful. But what do? We immediately jump to the next thing to find our success. The next thing that we will be known for. The next one. The pleaser. The pleaser. We're really good at this one. I'm pretty sure all of us have this one in there somewhere. Maybe not Jennifer. The pleaser. This person is fixated on solving everyone else's problems. They almost have this sonar that goes off that tells them exactly where the person is that needs a problem solved, because you can help them. You're the person who never says no to anyone. It's always yes, I can do that. And then it's panic when you go and look at your calendar and you realize, oh wait, no I can't. But you will find a way. They have this weight on their shoulders to take care of everyone else. And many times it's at the expense of their own health and their own soul. Because they will put everyone above themselves. And they'll pay for it. Pleasers feel that they have to do what everyone asks them to do because deep down they fear being excluded. They want to be needed. And the way that they see that they can be needed always is to be able to solve everyone's problems. But many times they can't solve their own. Number 3, the perfecter. Notice it's gold because gold is perfect, right? The perfecter. Oh, I'm so guilty of this. We have to be perfect. Everything has a place, unless it's my office desk. But I still know where it is, regardless of what it looks like. A person has to be right. They always have to have the last word. They don't ask God for guidance, but they look back and they say, God, bless what I've done the last 30 minutes. Everything has to be perfect. These people are self-critical of themselves and others. Perfecters are the people who go to God and say, please, bless what I just did. Make it be good. Perfecters cannot show their vulnerabilities. They have to have it all together, all the time. These people tend to have breakdowns. Because at some point, they cannot continue to wear the mask. Because the reality of their unperfect self will eventually crumble under the weight of trying to come across as perfect. To the world around you, it looks like your family, your career, and your life are perfect. But on the inside, you're falling apart one piece at a time. But you still have to look perfect. Everyone has to know that you strive for excellence. Number 4. The pretender. Notice it's half a mask here. The pretender. These people are the people who agree with everything. These people are the ones that you go up to and you say, hey, did you see that movie? It's really good. And they're like, oh yeah, I saw that movie. No, you haven't. You haven't seen that movie. Oh, yeah, that character was really good. He did. No. Did you hear that song on the... Yeah, that was a really cool... You have no clue what song they're talking about. But you've got to come across as though you know exactly. These people will act like they know everything, even when they know they don't. They have this deep insecurity about belonging, and they want to be seen as being good enough. If you and I were a fly on the wall in a high school, you would see a whole lot of pretenders. The really good pretenders are the ones that are accepted in all of the social clusters. The jocks, the geeks, the farmers. I'm just thinking of my high school, sorry. That you can go through all of them and be accepted because you put on a mask. You become whatever you need to be in those times. I share with you those four. But I want to share with you one of mine. One of my personal ones. My bag does not want to stay. You see, this was my mask in college. I was losing my hair. 90 degrees in the summer. Suckers up my head. Because I couldn't let people see that I didn't have hair. But you see, the problem is, everyone knew it. The only person I was trying to fool was myself. Jennifer will tell you that when we first met, I was trying to hang on to it as long as I could. I had this like little stubble on the top of my head, and she's like, seriously, get rid of that. I started shaving my head when I met Jennifer. But you know what? It was Jennifer who made me realize this is who I am. And it's okay. I don't need to be, I don't need to have hair on my head to make me who God wanted me to be. I can be me without hair. And the funny thing is, if they came out with some miracle drug that, miraculously grew hair, I don't know that I'd need it. Because that's not me anymore. I think to me, that would be just another way of me putting my mask back on. But you see, this hat became part of me. I didn't leave my dorm room without it. For about a year, that was me. Almost like I wasn't around these people for 3 years prior. It's like, seriously, But to me, I needed this because this made me comfortable around other people. But you see, God tells us we don't need our masks. We don't need these things to be who God wants us to be. God does not want you to be anything other than what he created you to be. So whatever your looks are, however you dress, whatever your weight is, whatever the color of your skin is, it's okay. God created you to be you. No one else. Here's the beauty of this. You don't have to please anybody but God. He created you. We're not hiding anything from him. He sees right through our masks. You can be fooling all the people in the world, but you're not fooling him. He knows. And the thing is, he knows why you're putting on those masks. He knows why you pull out your bag and you put that mask on when you walk into work. He knows why. That thing in your past. that you've buried because you really don't want to deal with it, because it's hard. That person who hurt you. And you refuse to let anyone see who you really are anymore because of that one person. You've made that one person the God of your life. Because that one person now has more control over you than God does. But you know what God does? He says, my dear son, I love you. My dear daughter, I love you. You don't need the mask. But you know what? He's put us on this earth to be Paul's. We should also be a Timothy. We should also allow people to speak into our life, but he's also called us to be Paul's. To speak into people's life and to pull out of them a greatness that they didn't see in themselves. I can think back throughout my life and think of specific coaches that pulled things out of me that I never knew that I was capable of. That saw something in me I didn't see in myself that I hid. You see, I feared embarrassment because in Little League, I had to be the best. I was not the best. I couldn't hit the ball. So as I got older, I began to see this temper come out. The umpire didn't say what I thought was the right call. He knew it because I told him. But you see, I couldn't be embarrassed because I was not that athlete. I was this one. I was the achiever. I was the performer. But you see, that mask got me a reputation for not being all that great to coach because I had an attitude. A mask literally hid my potential. What are the masks that you're hiding behind? My challenge to you is to find that sincere faith. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to name your mask. It may be one or multiple of the ones that we talked about here today, but it may be a different one. But what is your mask? Number 2, identify the wound that you're trying to cover up. Why are you wearing that mask? What makes you immediately get into your bag and pull out that mask and put it on? And the last one, find a Paul and get a Timothy. Find someone who can speak into your life and pull that greatness out of you. And find someone that's a little bit behind you that you can speak into their life. In this room, I think there's a whole lot of wisdom. I didn't used to be able to say this, but I can say this now. There's people in this room that can use that older wisdom. Saying there's younger people in here. That's what I'm saying. Speak into people's lives from the love that God has given you for them. And put down your mask. Allow yourself to be vulnerable to God. Allow Him to give you that sincere faith that you truly want.